Okay, folks, we are live. So for those listening at home, welcome to the Dungeon Musings YouTube channel. My name is Kevin Madison, and I will be your friendly dungeon muser today. Today, I am joined by a very old friend and a fellow gaming buddy, Jared Rascher from
Hello.
Gnome Stew and his own What Do I Know About Gaming blog, or What Do I Know blog. Jared, welcome. So I'm just seeing that I was getting a message from OBS that we're already overloading the stream. So clearly,
Nice.
Jared, I don't want to, get your head too big here, but no other player or guest has suddenly overloaded the stream with their awesomeness. So welcome. For those listening at home, this is going to be it's an ongoing part of a series I've done sporadically in the past, but this is, I'm changing the name of it to Behind the Screen Stream, because I think that sounds better than what I used to call it. At the time of recording, it is December 30th, 2020. Jared and I think, when was the last time we did this? What, 2019, 2018?
Man, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, a long time.
Yeah.
So what, well, I guess first off, for those who aren't familiar with Jared, because you have not graced our channel in such a long time, Jared, why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, and where we can find some of your awesome stuff?
All right. Well, I'm an old guy, as you introduced me. And, well, you can take oldest friend in multiple ways.
Totally.
Or old friend. Anyway, so I had my own blog where I would just randomly talk about games for a long time. Probably about 2017, I started doing more formalized reviews, and you can find that now at whatdoiknowjr.com. And after that, I'm still continuing to add to that blog, but after a little bit of doing those reviews, I started writing reviews for Gnome Stew, which is an awesome honor, because I had read Gnome Stew for years, and it was, it was great to have John invite me on there. And more recently, well, actually less recently, you can find my YouTube channel. Just type in Jared Rascher. You will either find, I checked it out, you'll either find my channel, or you will find me talking to Rich Howard for the Whelmed podcast about DC heroes. So either way, I don't care. You can watch that.
Nice.
And
Jared, I heard that you also have on your channel a pretty amazing Shadow the Demon Lord run.
Why, yes.
Featuring an obnoxious Jotun character.
Oh my gosh. Honestly, I'm so glad that you played that character, because I don't know what it is, but I am fascinated with having like giant related things in campaigns. So I was really glad when you played that character, because it leaned into that.
Yep. Yeah, it was, so jokes aside, what Jared did was a really impressive thing of running shows. Those who aren't familiar, Shadow the Demon Lord is a what's a horror fantasy role-playing game by Robert Schwab, and it is uses its own proprietary system. It's one of the very, very best one-book RPGs I've ever read, and it's also intended to be run as like an 11 adventure campaign. Yeah, it's intended to have a beginning, middle, end to the story for your characters. And Jared took it upon himself to run the campaign as a 11-part adventure too, and succeeded, which is it's really not, it's hard to do with that particular game, because I've tried running it and I end up getting lost in the weeds so many times. You did a great job. When you had a bunch of either like streamers or content creators or RPG creators, so you had a terrible like group of cats wandering all over the place.
I got podcasters, I got designers.
Yeah. So everyone wanted to do their own thing with the game. But you did a terrific job of keeping everyone on task, and even when we had characters who were working cross purposes as well too, because one of the characters was really kind of working to wipe out half of humanity.
Yep.
So it was pretty great.
Yeah, and I like that we got the I don't want to say happy ending. The world didn't end, but horrific things happened. So that was kind of a good ending for Shadow of the Demon Lord game.
Well, it was, and you know what? And the postscript was terrific too. Like that was one of my favorite things, was being able to put a point on the on the end of a campaign. So I did not include a link to that, but I'll do that. I've included a link to your blog and to your Twitter account and to Gnome Stew in there as well. But I'll be sure to go in afterwards and put that if anyone wants to check that out. It was a lot of fun, and actually another familiar face on the channel too. Jason Hobbs played in the first part of that campaign, and then he got distracted by something shiny or two. He was very, very busy at the time, so he's busy now too. But in any event, so that's and I mean that's how also we knew each other as well too. Is just Jared had an open call for people playing in the game, and I jumped on. This was when Google Plus was still a thing.
Yeah. And I had been watching your videos up before that. Up to that point as well. So I mean, I knew of you before we started gaming together. So
those videos were terrible too. Holy shit!
Well, I was gonna say I thought you had seen like one of my Marvel Heroic ones that I had on my YouTube as well.
Yeah.
So
well, and
that was back when people could stream games and there weren't that many of them.
Yeah. I did the time of recording is a day after I did my year in review, and it's funny that I had like 2 games that I mentioned of like, but one of the reasons that I'm not good running this one or not planning is because like there's already a bunch of people running this game. So, the value, and I mean, like, in the same way that the way I found your channel in the first place was because of that Marvel Heroic game, because I was trying to learn the game. And I find for myself, watching people play it, that's how I find value in the actual plays, in addition to just enjoying, watching people play. But seeing how the game actually functions at the table and how people respond to it is, and the problems they have with it too, when you're like, wait, how does this work? That's all very helpful. And I think that was... at the time there was a lot less of us who were who were doing it.
What was interesting, mentioning Google Plus, a lot of what happened there was because Hangouts was integrated into the whole suite of things that Google was doing at the moment. It seemed like that was a big boom for people playing online as well.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it just there's other things that have replaced, like MeWe was the thing that it seemed like most people gravitated towards afterwards, but it just is not the same.
No.
And Reddit, I just have no... Yeah, Reddit's toxic dumbfire, so I don't really want to go there. And then the Discords, I found the Discord has been quite good for our community, for the Dungeon Musings community, but I rarely venture out of that, and it's hard to find specific other areas, and it feels like coming into like a clique in a lot of cases when you're going into
and I think Discord is also, it's good for when you want to have an ongoing conversation, but it's not as good as like on Google Plus, where you could say, I'm wondering about this thing, and just kind of like mini blog something and then have other people chime in on it.
Totally. Yeah. So anyway, we're God damn it. It's only like 5 years past, but we're already like, oh, things were so much better when...
I know.
So what we're here to talk about today, let's transition to the future from our past. And what we're talking about today is some of the games I want to talk to you about. Your gaming in 2020. Mm-hmm. Some of the standouts for. I got 2 specific things I want to ask you about as well, too. That may be ways of backdooring my way in to add 2 more games to the list. But what we are also going to talk about is games that we're hyped about. We've each selected 4 games that we want to talk about that are just games that we're excited about. And for myself, these are ones that I did not discuss in the year in review. And I don't have plans to get these, or concrete plans at least, to get these to the table for whatever reason. I mean, the reason is because there's only 365 days in the year, and it's only... we did a total of the amount of games we streamed last year. And we did with tonight's session, 814 hours of streaming.
Wow.
Yeah. So in this shit heap of a year, we managed to spend 33 days gaming. So that's pretty great.
Oh, goodness.
But anyway, so tell me about your gaming, because I know you used to have, at least before the pandemic, you had a regular like in-person Sunday session.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. So, okay, we started off 2020 back before this this year of hell started. Um, I went to a convention in January. Remember those? Conventions used to be a thing.
Oh yeah.
And at the convention, I played For the Queen, which I love that game. It is a great... for anyone that hasn't seen For the Queen, it is a card-based game where you get prompts. And they basically ask you questions, and you define your character by these prompts, and then by the end of the game, you will be asked if you plan on defending the queen or not, because she will be under attack. And it's really neat because it's not like you don't roll any dice, you don't spend anything from any pools, you're just defining your character as you're answering these questions. And by the end of it, you get an idea of who the queen is and who your character is. And I love it. It's been really neat, but I got to play that at a convention in January. And then I played like 3 sessions of Call of Cthulhu back then, because I don't get to play a lot of Call of Cthulhu, so I mainly do it at conventions. And I find that works really well, because then if, you know, my character dies horribly, I don't mind nearly as much because it's at a convention game.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of what you're... I mean, depending on the group, that's sort of what you're signing up for. There's a masochistic player that like enjoys Call of Cthulhu, and there's the ones that ran it as Pulp Cthulhu before Pulp Cthulhu came out. Yeah. Right? And would come up with cockamamie reasons for why they'd survive or not go insane or whatever. That's great. So, and then
in person up until March, I was running my my 5th edition D&D game, which was set in Midgard, and we were playing through the Tales of the Old Margreave compilation.
That brings me to my first
that is it
excuse too. I got so. Before we go on from that, tell me a little bit about the like. What was your experience with Tales of the Old Margreave? What did you like? What did you use from the I'm assuming you used the Hero's Handbook?
Yes. I had 3 bearfolk in my in my group.
So awesome! I'm so jealous.
We had 3 bearfolk and a halfling warlock, and the halfling warlock had red hair. So but we also we started off. We had a Gearforged whose nickname was Goldie. So we had Goldie, Locke, and 3 bears. And
so before we get Ellen, let's just quickly situate because the thing with Midgard, you know, for those who are unfamiliar with the setting, this is Midgard. That's the setting book. Unsurprisingly, I've found this to be a little intimidating to get into. It's not the kind of thing you can gloss over and then like start running, because there's lots of canon stuff you can get wrong. Gods are set up very differently than they are in a lot of other settings. The cultures are a little different as well too, and it's tough. I find they give some good suggestions of like, look, pick an area and then start there and then play out. What did you find with the Tales of the Old Margreave? Like, I backed it on Kickstarter as well with the expectation that it offers that kind of like, you're gonna not pick every race from every or species or ancestry or whatever, right? Yeah, and I really like adventures that zero in on a part of a setting. I think that's actually one of the things that Wizards has done well. The reason why I think the Forgotten Realms is still around is because it's not just here's a 400-page book about the Forgotten Realms and here's another 300-page book. It has been here's an adventure set in the North. Here's an adventure set in Baldur's Gate. Yeah, and I think that has been a smarter approach for them than, you know, just saturation bombing with you know, with a bunch of source books. The Tales of the Old Margreave, just to give a quick overview, the difference between Midgard and, say, Forgotten Realms is it is a lot more Eastern European based. There's not nearly as much folklorish stuff that would have come from like England or France. It's more like, you know, Poland and Germany and places like that. There's a lot of like dark fairy tale elements to it. Baba Yaga is a big, you know, element of the setting, especially in the Margreave, because she, at least some version of her lives in the Margreave, because there may not only be one version of her. Yeah, isn't that one of the, like, the gods are sort of like they manifest under different faces or guises?
Yeah, that's another thing that I kind of like about that, is that like Thor might be Thor in the Northlands, but he is Perun in some of the Midlands. And so because of that, you have different gods, like in the Northland, he is married to Sif, but in the Midlands, he is married to Morena, the blood goddess. So there's different, like, the idea is that it's most people that are like learned scholars believe these are the same deities with different names. But, you know, if you talk to somebody that is a devout worshiper from one region, they may not like that you assert, well, isn't that just Thor? No. There's a significant difference. So that's one of the things in the setting that's interesting. There's also a heavy reliance on using, again, like the Eastern European gods is like the big bads. Like Zernabog is a big, you know, like even like Loki isn't necessarily always villainous, but like Zernabog is just presented as this being that wants to bring eternal night over everything. But that is another thing that's interesting is even in like the alignment section, a lot of the gods are only given like one part of their alignment because of how they manifest in different pantheons that they are a part of. So Loki, for example, is chaotic. They don't really force you to say, is he chaotic evil? Is he chaotic neutral? He's just chaotic. However you encounter him, however he manifests, he will be chaotic.
And the old Margreave setting is, because there's the sort of the setting or the city that gets the most focus is Zobek, right?
Yes.
And then
that's like the trade hub in the middle of the heartlands of.
And then the old Margreave is just north of it, I think.
Yeah, it's to the northeast.
Okay.
And there's a trade road that was cut through the old Margreave that goes north from that connects Zobek to the northern parts of the setting. And the Margreave itself is really interesting because you think of, you know, there's magical forests and there's ancient forests in a lot of settings, but they go out of their way to point out that the old Margreave is literally older than the gods. It is like this ancient structure, and there is like deep magic associated with it. And if you play through the adventure, I don't want to spoil too much, but there is a reason that it's important that it's old, and it's connected to something older that it might have connections to.
That's awesome. Well, and the newest, there's that new thing they're kickstarting as well too, Scarlet Citadel, I think.
Yeah,
I'm backing that as well too because the Kobold stuff is super cool, even if I don't get the table.
I'm not a big dungeon crawler type, you know, DM. I would rather have short focused dungeons, but I back that too because it's Kobold Press. You know,
yeah, and it's located fairly near Zobek as well too, right?
I'd have to look up where that one was located.
I thought it was in hills near there because it was a place you could do expeditions to. I don't know the setting well enough, but
yeah, because I thought it was closer to the Magocracies, but then that's a little bit further east.
I would totally be, you would probably be more right than I would be about this. So what level did you guys get to by the time you had to pull the pin on it?
11th level.
Oh wow! And starting at first?
Yep.
Very cool.
So, and basically, the way the campaign ended, it was an ending. You know, it wasn't, you know, we didn't just quit playing or anything. We played through all the adventures in there. We did a capstone with all the characters. The things, as far as the adventures go, I had to do some connective tissue to make it into a campaign because... And this is, I mean, it's not because they didn't do what they were planning on doing. This is an anthology of adventures. They just happened to fall in the line where you could run one and then level up and run the next one, but they're not necessarily all connected other than that they all happen in the Margreave.
Huh. Okay.
So I did a little bit more connective tissue using the background material that they have in the adventure to turn it into a consistent campaign. So, and I actually have some blog posts about modifying it to set it up for campaign play. What we did, for example, is in order to kind of walk the PCs from one adventure to the next, most of the PCs had like a Fey patron that kind of picked them as a champion early on, which was really easy with the bear folk, with the Bear King. But and our warlock was had Baba Yaga as her patron, so that
Oh,
worked
that's
out
cool.
pretty well there too.
Yeah.
But all of that went really well. I love the fact that it's all because the Margreave only has small towns in it. There are no cities in the Margreave. It's all like, very small towns of people. So our characters picked the first town they were in and basically made it their home base and got to know these people, and it was great.
Mhm.
Like, they were bringing people back to that town, and the town was getting larger because they would save somebody and that person wouldn't have anywhere to live anymore, so they would bring them back to the town. And it really created a nice dynamic of, this is their home. This wasn't just a spot on a map anymore. Because they got to bring those new people back there, and the more they talked to people in that setting, the more I gave details that weren't, in the first adventure where they were introduced. And it was, I really like that. As far as trouble with the adventure, I love it. It's a great source book, but I have a big caveat there. This is not to excuse anything, but I know a lot of people don't necessarily understand that the G word used in connotation with Roma people is considered a slur for a lot of Roma people.
Yeah.
And I don't know that a lot of people understood that even a few years ago. And the original Tales of the Old Margreave was written for Pathfinder. And there are sections of it that did not get changed. So they use the G terminology for, there is a group of people very much like the Roma, because it's Eastern European, called the Kariv. And they use that term a lot in the book. And it is unfortunate. I did not use the term while we were playing. But the other thing is, most of the adventure is fine. There is one particular adventure where the Kariv, which are a stand-in for the Roma, are portrayed as charlatans that are waiting to steal from you and backstab you. And I changed that whole section out because I don't like that. I didn't want to portray that in a game. I don't have a, and I can't be the arbiter of whether something's right or wrong for portraying Roma people, but I felt better about portraying them as people that traveled in wagons and maybe did fortune telling than portraying them as people that are going to bilk you out of your money or, ambush you as bandits.
Well, it's like, setting aside that too, it's also just, it's a lazy stereotype as well. Like,
yes, definitely.
Having the thieving, roving, nomads, that just, it's kind of a boring thing. I mean, that's the Vistani half the time in Curse of Strahd or in Ravenloft in general, right?
Yeah, and actually, Wizards actually went back through and changed some of that text in it.
Yeah.
I haven't read all of it, but I read some of the selected passages that people had called out, and I appreciate that they went back through and did that. In my campaign for the Margreave, I actually introduced 2 NPCs that were Kariv, just specifically. So, like, one of them was just a guy that knew everybody because they traveled, all around the Margreave and all these settlements. Yeah. So he just was basically their person that could introduce them to anybody because he had traveled everywhere.
And that's not to say that the characters can't be, like, they can also make great villains as well too. It's just that the to have it just be the they're going to rob you on the road kind of thing. Like, there's certainly more interesting things you could do with that, particularly if I'm not sure if they have the association with Baba Yaga, but if there's that association, then it's not necessarily good or evil. They're just pursuing the interest of a very specific, the very specific interest of a goddess.
Yeah, and honestly, I like portraying just about any sapient species. I like having more nuance to them than just good or evil anyway, even if they're completely a fantasy creation. So yeah. But that was my main concern with the whole thing. Everything else and it's mainly that one adventure that really.
Well, and it sounds like that's fairly easily tweaked as well too into being something different, right? So, what was your favorite NPC from that whole thing?
Oh goodness. Let's see. My favorite. There is one adventure where you specifically interact with Baba Yaga, and that was a lot of fun.
Do you do voices?
I did. I can't remember exactly how I didn't do like a big accent. I just did kind of a creepy, drawn out sort of, voice for what she was saying whenever she was talking. And on top of that, she had in the adventure, it says that she has I forget what it is. It's basically it's a sapient cat that can communicate. And when they first reached her hut, I played that up too, because the cat's like, oh, she's in a bad mood right now. You really don't want to interrupt her.
It's funny. I've had the last, 5 years, we've had rescue dogs. So we're used to dealing with dogs with behavioral issues and whatnot too. And one of the players called me out on that about when they encountered some thing. They're like, can you fucking tell he's got rescue dogs? Oh my god! Well, that's cool. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that because I really want to try and get Midgard. 5e is such a tough nut for me. Not only because it's just not the specific type of experience I feel I get with 5e at the table is different from what I necessarily want from a lot of my ongoing campaigns, but it does a really, really good job of cinematic, bigger than life heroes, especially if you start at third. But the trouble with 5e is there's so many great settings for it.
Oh, I know.
Even the official stuff before you go into the what do you call it, fan made stuff or whatever. But one of my favorite sessions from the year was a 5th edition session running in the World of Warcraft setting with a fan made creation for it, and it's so good. It did such a good job of adapting that stuff and making it playable and easy to throw together. So. Man, oh man.
I would suggest, though, if you really want to get into Midgard with it, which I have not got a chance to play it, but I did read through it and review it. Empire of the Ghouls is actually a really good...
It's on the shelf.
The reason I like Empire of the Ghouls maybe a little bit better than Tales of the Old Margreave as far as introducing someone to Midgard is over the course of the adventure, you don't go all over Midgard, but you do go all over the Midland section.
Okay.
So cool. It'll take you from like Zobek to like the dwarven cantons to the I'm trying to remember now the country that the vampires took over, but basically it walks you through a lot of the nearby countries. So you don't just get a snapshot of literally one area like you do with the Margreave. You get a snapshot of a few of these interacting pieces without being overwhelmed with the whole setting at once.
Okay, cool. I've got it, and I've got the virtual tabletop version as well too. And I think the reason I sort of I'll hold off on that is just because I felt like I thought it was going to be a lot more underground stuff. So I thought that it was going to be a little close to what we are going to be experiencing the night below. But
and that's a little bit more, not to spoil it too much, but it's a little bit more towards the end.
Okay, cool.
There are a lot more like things that you're finding out about on the surface before you end up, diving in there for the last part of the campaign.
Have you checked out Rime of the Frostmaiden yet? I'm not sure if you've reviewed it for your for the channel or for.
I did not. Actually, I did. The one thing I did, there was some controversy about one of the early encounters, and I did an in-depth I did a tactical playthrough of that encounter multiple different ways, and it was more a proof of concept because it is a mission that's given to first level characters. And I did this as a proof of contact to see, okay, if you're not dumb and you don't just head straight into this and assume that it's going to be a pushover fight, you can win it.
Yeah.
It's not easy. It's very easy for it to turn into a TPK, but if you are careful, it's not necessarily a TPK. And
one of our players play tested the thing. And what he had said is that they had an incredible amount of deaths early on, but that seemed to be the tone they were going for it. It's supposed to be a much more dangerous campaign than what some of the others were. So 'cause I saw the same thing too, and I picked up recently the DMs Guild had a series of supplements that flesh out those things and try to address some of the the balancing of the random encounters and such. For me, it was more the final. Without spoiling, there's a final big setting that you end up in that viewers who are familiar with the setting will know what I'm talking about. And it isn't fleshed out in great detail in the book, but it adds a bunch of stuff on. But it was interesting to see them address that stuff in the GM's Guild, and I wonder how much of that is because that shit drops the day that these things release. I wonder how much of that day one patching is how they're relying on DM's Guild to.
I don't know, because I mean, in some cases, I can see still running these things without any of that, but at the same time, I think the fact that they have freelancers and those freelancers have a way of adding basically their director's cut of the part they worked on, that it does make it to where they can do that. We saw that a lot with the Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus as well.
Yeah.
There was a Candlekeep product that came out on the DM's Guild that, like, on top of spelling out fleshing out Candlekeep more, it like redid the entire section where you're in Candlekeep to give you more of a tour of Candlekeep. So it's not you go to Candlekeep and then you immediately go to hell. It was more of a like, here, enjoy this place that has books.
Yeah. Well, it's tough, like for the publishers as well. I mean, I can't. Rime the Frostmaiden there's some elements in it that I can't use in my games. Partly, I mean, because it's it's D&D 5th, not 2nd, the way I'm running it. But so many of those encounters are so good and easily like plucked out and plucked into something else. Just really interesting settings, really cool concepts for monsters, and it's not to slight D&D, but it's honestly the kind of thing I more see with Paizo products than I do with D&D. D&D offers up a lot of like, variations of the same kind of stuff. And I don't mean that in a bad way necessarily. They do a very good, like, the Storm King's Thunder is great, but it's not like, it doesn't have the weird variations where you're fighting like a frost giant monk, in the Paizo giant, riff thing. And I mean, like, there's something to be said for being offered what you are expecting from it as well, too. But I really like that they offered, in particular, the Gnoll Vampire in Rime the Frostmaiden is just, I love it so much. And it's scaring the shit out of my players.
I think, and basically, okay, for me, I'm weird because if I haven't read, like, almost all of the book, I'm not going to offer too much of an opinion on it. I have skimmed it, and I had to get it because I love Icewind Dale, and it's not just the Drift books. It is because I played through Icewind Dale like 3 times, the computer role-playing game. And I love kind of the deeper lore of the area, and I love the concept that this is like the last settlement, before you hit the spine of the world where people kind of end up when they have nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
I love that feel to it. It's a great...
And it's a boomtown, too, because of the Knucklehead Trout, too. So, like, when we were first talking about the setting with the players, getting them familiar, I was saying, like, it's, if you think of Deadwood, it's kind of like that. Because there is that, like, people are there to hide, to make a crap ton of money, or because they got nowhere else to go. And that's people are flush with crazy amounts of money. Everything costs more, and then you've also got the elements that are against you, plus whatever else is going on. It's a really, really, really good setting.
Yeah. One of the things that I liked, and this is kind of a continuation of what they introduced in Baldur's Gate, but I like the secrets with an asterisk. Because they introduced this concept where players can draw a secret.
Oh yeah,
and it might give you some kind of background. It might give you some kind of extra benefit beyond what you get for your class or your background or whatever.
Yep.
But or it might just tie into the story so that when you go into this encounter and you have this secret, it changes the whole tenor of that encounter because it's different because you're there.
Yeah.
And I like it, except I wish there was something that incentivized people eventually sharing their secret.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing is, if you never share that secret, it's pointless. If no one ever finds out your secret, you wasted it, basically.
Yeah.
But I kind of wish, just from the standpoint of somebody that's never really gotten into that mindset, there had been more direction, like, make sure you tell somebody this at some point in time. And I think if you incentivize that mechanically, that would be like, okay, this is when I'm going to drop this so that now I have this resource, and that's what I kind of wish.
In one of the things I ran over the past year, one of our players was a co-showrunner on the October Faction show for Netflix.
Yeah.
So to celebrate it going out, I put together an October Faction game for it using
Mhm.
Traveler as the chassis. But the mechanic that we had in it to keep with the theme of secrets revealed in the series was that only when like you had certain abilities that could only be powered by a narrative meta currency that came when secrets were revealed.
Mhm.
So it gave the incentive for people to get that shit out and start role playing with it. I don't.
Yeah.
The trouble is with D&D Fifth, like inspiration's nice, but it is not nearly significant enough to justify the like. And now you've done this, and here you go.
I okay. Here's my thing. I love D&D Fifth. I don't think that I would be wrong if I were to say this is my favorite iteration of D&D.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's me. I'm not saying it's the best. I'm saying it's my favorite. But inspiration was the most tacked on, not fleshed out section of the entire thing. It felt like, you know what, we should do something to encourage role playing, and we're kind of seeing some things in some of these indie games. So let's throw this thing on here,
Yeah.
and it doesn't work the way it should work, and it needs work.
Yeah. You know what might be interesting is that like if each of them gave situational advantages, like a situational advantage, and not in a like when you're attacking on whatever, like the kind of like broad base stuff you get from like 13th Age, when you get where you get the theme backgrounds, like so that you've got something that gives you a way of there's the mechanical incentive to try and pursue that, adding that role playing bit into the game, but there's also a story relation to it. So, but the other thing I wanted to ask you about too, before we dive onto our games, you also ran Star Trek Adventures this year, didn't you?
Oh yeah, I am still running it now. We're almost.
That was number 2 of my slipped in games. Tell me about your experience with Star Trek Adventures.
If it wasn't behind my screen, I'd grab my I'd grab my Klingon book and hold it up too.
Yeah, it's mine's up there too.
So yeah, my face-to-face games that I started running were D&D 5e, Star Trek Adventures, and I played 2 sessions of Spectaculars and was going to start playing that. That is much harder to do online. So Star Trek Adventures and Tales of the Old Margreave both transferred to online, so I managed to finish those out running them online. I love Star Trek Adventures so much. I hate to do the comparison thing. I like the Fantasy Flight Star Wars. I think it does do Star Wars well, but it does not do Star Wars as well as Star Trek Adventures does Star Trek.
No. I specifically one of our players who's very generously donated for like every year we've had charity sessions. We've been running a series of Star Trek Star Wars things, and after running the first adventure from the starter set from Star Trek Adventures, I said like this is what Star Wars should be. Like it's so light on its feet. The momentum mechanic is so good, and they stripped out a lot of the clunky stuff. And I mean, clunky is the wrong word. That's way too pejorative. The nitty gritty stuff that you get from Conan, you know, that would have been inappropriate for a more narrative kind of like discovery based game. I don't need to have like super detailed stats for the Batleth, you know?
Yeah. It needs to do damage, and like I do like there's one of the the traits that a weapon might have in Star Trek is you can't subdue someone with this. So you're generating threat if you attack somebody because you can't. A Batleth is going to cut things off of you. And I mean, how fast in not to pick on Fantasy Flight Star Wars, and I have a very specific acts. Like when I first started running Fantasy Flight Star Wars games, they were my favorite of anything I was running at the time because of the way that you got the dice results were so interesting and felt so Star Wars and whatnot. But over time, that got kind of tiresome when it was for myself, where it was always going in there. You're always having to have a conversation. And the funniest, this is when G Plus was still a thing, but one guy was running Genesis for his kids. And the funniest thing he said is that, like, when they sat down, they were about to start rolling a dice roll, and they're like, okay, well, let's talk about what we're going to roll. And the kid just goes, ugh. And I'm like, yeah, I think that kid articulated my like, it has really, really fun results and stuff like that. The starter sets are some of the best I've ever run. But this, I feel like it has a lot of the fun kind of conversational stuff, but I'm not spending as much time fucking around with the dice. Yeah. I don't want to trash the narrative dice because I actually saw a lot of people trash them when these games first came out, and it's like, no, they produce some really interesting results, but the problem is, the longer you play, you do kind of have some cognitive exhaustion trying to make everything that you get interesting.
And the bigger the dice pools get to, the more like, so there's this element of swinginess with any like dice pool mechanic, or I mean any game, right? The D20 is a swingy dice as well. But the results in that feel a lot more inconsistent when you're getting a lot of like reds and a lot of yellows in there.
Well, and it's so weird when you do something like, I get what it's trying to say is the, you know, like the successes, you successfully doing a thing isn't the same thing as something beneficial happening at the same time. And I get that, and it does that reasonably well. But there are times when you get these lopsided, like, well, I got a triumph and 4 successes and 8 threats.
Yeah.
What just happened?
Like, okay, let's try and make sense of this. Yeah, and and again, like, that's also part of the fun, like, especially those unanticipated. The thing that I love the best about the Despairs was justifying DM bullshittery.
Yeah.
You know, giving the buy-in for, like, it's not me fucking around with, like, oh, and then so-and-so walks around the corner. I have a narrative justification for doing that kind of stuff that I would not feel comfortable doing otherwise because they would call me on it. Right?
Yeah, there's a secret alarm that you didn't notice.
Exactly. It would take the players out of so I like that a great deal, but with Star Trek Adventures, I totally agree. Like the seamless transition between tactical scenes to narrative scenes to, you know, are effectively skill challenges. I love how they work in the game.
Yes, that is very interesting because if anybody hasn't seen Brandis Stoddard's work, you should read his work on his blog and for Tribality, but he has been talking about skill challenges. And one of the things, as I'm listening to him talk about skill challenges from 4th edition and how you would make them work in 5th edition, is Star Trek Adventures nailed how to work some of these skill challenges so much better than 4E managed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And
Star Wars
part
Saga
of that is
did as well, right? Like
oh my god. Yeah, Galaxy of Intrigue is awesome. That was the best explanation of skill challenges ever because it had all of these menus of things to modify it with, which is what you need. But that's also what I was going to say about Star Trek Adventures is because it gives you, I think there's a couple things. The fact that there are intervals, so you know how much time it's taking. Like part of creating a extended test in Star Trek Adventures is knowing the intervals that you're working with. So if it's going to take you a half an hour, that's part of where you start thinking about what are the consequences. Because if it's going to take you a half hour each interval and you only have 2 hours until the Cardassians arrive, then suddenly you have stakes. You know that
it's such an unfortunate name now. Oh my god.
I know.
Oh my god. I can't believe, like, I love DS9, but that's my first association was like, Kim's showing up? What?
Oh my gosh, yeah, I know.
My brain is clearly full of pop culture trash now, and not the right kind.
But yeah, what I was gonna say is I have intentionally tried to throw almost everything that you would see in a Star Trek series at my characters to see how it works in the system, and just about everything has worked really well. The only thing we haven't done, we did a time-based story, but not a time travel story. Because I liked the thing from Discovery where they had the time crystals and that. So we had a situation where there was a time crystal on board the ship and different alternate versions of the people from a few minutes ahead or behind would start showing up. And they had to resolve that. And that was fun because in one case, it like a version of them warned themselves that something was about to go wrong, and that was kind of fun. You know, that sort of like. I know. But what was it?
You know, from your Twitter post too, I know that you've incorporated a court martial in one of your things. You've had fleet engagements as well. Yeah. So like,
because I wanted to use the fleet engagements because we're basically wrapping up the Dominion War in this time period. So I wanted to look for something that wasn't detailed. It was kind of mentioned off screen. And one of the big things was Beta Z. which is where Deanna Troi and the Loxana are from, was actually taken over by the Cardassians. And one of our commanding officer, our XO, is Betazoid. So we kind of made that the focal point, is them being assigned to that task force that is liberating Beta Z. So it's got some personal stakes for them too.
Well, it's a great time. Like mine, my white whale of a campaign is the Star Trek Vanguard that's set between like the triangle of space between Federation, Cardassian, Klingon space, and follows up on the like kind of Third Man era Berlin, right, where it's partitioned off and they're trying to figure out how to sort things out, and there's the post-war, like all the stuff that makes Eberron so great, or some of the things that make Eberron so great, but in a Star Trek setting. Would you agree that Star Trek Adventures feels more Star Trek than any of the other RPGs? Like and not to slight Last Unicorn or Decipher or FASA.
I am terrible because I have never played any of the other Star Trek ones. Every time I started thinking I would like to get that, it would go out of print. Yes, because honestly, the Last Unicorn and I can't remember the last two,
Decipher,
like both of them would like start putting things out, and then by the time I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting, they would be out of print, and it'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I won't get invested in this.
Well, the Decipher ones, they managed to get the full. There's enough books out there to have a full set of things, right? Like the aliens, the species, the starships, the whatever. Their Lord of the Rings game did not get to that point. They stalled out at a certain point before they lost the license, or it became non-profitable. But the neat thing with the Decipher one was a lot of the designers from Last Unicorn carried over to that. So you got a lot of continuity of the benefit of the whatever they felt was missteps in the first iteration of it. They were able to address in that. But this is, I think, and I've run Last Unicorn, I've run Decipher. I enjoy both of those. I've run FASA too back in the day, but I mean, like that was when it's so far back in like canon that it's really hard to. It's such a it occupies a space that like Starfleet Battles does in terms of canonical.
Yeah, when you get these weird things where it's like, hey, maybe we'll have a supplement for that brand new Next Generation thing that's coming.
They had nothing for them to fight but the stats for the Star Trek Enterprise broke all the rules of the Starship creation. Boy, but yeah, no, it's great. So the thing that I was seeing that you've had it at the table for such a long time, the thing I am interested in is the long-term play of it, because it's got a really unusual experience point system or advancement system.
So we started off using the advancement system that is in the core rulebook. And the original core rulebook, it is, I'm trying to, if anybody's familiar with Fate, it's kind of similar to that, where you have like short-term advancement where you can change things about your character, but you net stay the same, basically. And then you have like arc milestones that are, you can do something more momentous with. And then you had spotlight things where like after a certain person has had a certain number of episodes that kind of feature their character, they get one where they can actually change their stats. And what's rough about that one is in a TV series, it's easy to say we're going to give Geordi 5 episodes to shine, we're going to give Worf 5 episodes to shine. It is not easy to do that in an RPG. Even if you're a GM that's very good at sharing the spotlight, sometimes someone came up with a good idea that resolves something and it becomes their spotlight even when it wasn't meant to be their spotlight.
Yeah.
And what the Klingon rulebook has is a revision to those. And I love this revision so much, because what that one does is it's basically just saying if you will write a log entry for each session. And for every number of log entry, and you don't log entry, when I say log entry, you don't have to write out, a full thing. Basically what you're saying is I used this value in this circumstance so that you remember a scene. That's your log entry. And you can call back to that log entry to get bonus determination. And when you have a certain number of log entries, you get an advancement.
For those unfamiliar, determination is the narrative meta currency in
Yes.
Star Trek Adventures. Cool. And that so then I know that they released a PDF with like back sort of like revising it for use with Star Trek Adventures as well too.
Yeah, and basically a lot of it you could run it straight out of the Klingon thing, but what they most of what the Federation one does is just say, call it this for a Federation game. It's not honor and dishonor and all of that. It's but yeah, there's actually there's kind of two different ways to advance, because the log entries and the milestones have to do with your specializations and your stats. But you can also earn like commendations and change your rank and buy favors with and what it is in the Klingon one, it's glory, and it's commendation in Starfleet. And that's on a separate track. And the way you determine that, I love this too, because it asks you a bunch of questions about your mission. And there's a list of positive aspects and a list of negative aspects, and that determines a pool that you roll to see how much acclaim that you got for that mission. So if you lied to a bunch of people and innocent people got killed and things like that, you're way more likely to not generate a lot of acclaim on that mission versus, but what's been interesting is like now when we've been playing out these things in the Dominion War, when a ship blows up in, a fleet engagement, they always have to answer that that question, did anyone die during this mission? Because Starfleet cares about even opposing people dying.
Yeah.
They have to answer no to that because it's a war and they blew up a Cardassian ship. They can't stun somebody in the vacuum,
Yeah. Jeez.
So it's I really like that, and I like that you can buy the different commendations, and the commendations, some of them are pulled from canon, like the Christopher Pike Medal of I forget what it's called, but like there's things like that in there, and they have a specific mechanical benefit that you can usually use like once per session.
Well, and that's I think one of the ways that the system seems to augment the skill challenges experience is that I know they don't call it that, but I mean that's what they are. Is there are things in your character sheet that can actually specifically augment that, and that's one thing that 4E kind of lost the opportunity on, is to have those ways to specifically be like, oh, I get this advantage in this specific type of circumstance, right? Yeah,
our scientists, for example, when we were talking about intervals, so like if your interval is a half an hour each time you can make a check, our Klingon scientists, when they are doing bold science, they can make 2 checks in an interval instead of 1.
Okay.
So if it's a certain, like, if they were trying to repair something, they're no more help than anybody else on the ship. But if they're trying to come up with, say, a vaccine for something, then they are working faster than anybody else on the ship, because then they're getting to do science with an exclamation point.
Yeah, it's man, that's really good to hear about the long term, because that's the thing I think that I would want to what I would want to see with that is not just it's great for a one shot as well. Like I've only run one full adventure with it, and it was a shit ton of fun. And when the starter set too, I found was I've read the rule book, I prepped some stuff for the rule book, but I found the rule book was the original rule book at least was not great in its layout, and hard to learn the rules, but the starter set is amazing.
The starter set is much clearer, and as far as some of the more complicated subsystems, like the scientific method thing where you're trying to figure out like a science problem, or even the progress tracks, they're better explained in the Klingon book than they are in the original book.
And I mean, it's effectively like the 1.5 edition of a brand new game too. So like they didn't have the benefit of learning a lot of that stuff from, even though there's other games that use a 2D20 system, they go to such lengths to make sure that it is appropriately modified for whatever they're trying to simulate. Like John Carter feels different than Infinity, than Conan, than Star Trek. So. Awesome.
And I actually ran a Dishonored game for a few sessions this year too, which is also a 2D20 game. So that was interesting to see the difference there too.
You don't say. That's great. I after a Star Trek adventure, after a Conan session is actually where I picked this up, because I know that the Dishonored game was a big influence on Blades in the Dark, and Blades in the Dark is just a harder fit for for the roster of players I play with. Something that's like this, that's a more traditional game with a lighter touch 2D20 thing, I think is much more likely to be more satisfactory for a lot of the people. Not taking anything away from the Blades in the Dark games or Forged in the Dark games. They're awesome, but gotta have the right...
one of the things that's interesting about Dishonored is they don't have the D6 dice in there. You are literally just doing D20s for that version of it.
No, it looked pretty cool. I haven't run it yet, so I can't speak to what it's going to be like at the table, but I liked a lot of what I read. Oh, I'll be right back. It's
yes.
Fucking it's FedEx is delivering today. I'll be right back. 1 sec. I just realized my sound was off. I get to enjoy my lovely quarantine soccer shorts. Noble Knight Games delivering one day. Love it. So we were talking about Dishonored, I think, when I was so rudely interrupted by FedEx.
I will say because they actually sent me a review copy of the PDF way before it came out, and it was not marked as a beta or anything. Huh?
It's because you're a big deal.
Oh yeah. But it was not marked as a beta or anything, so I did my review off of it, and there were some issues with that version of the PDF because they didn't have like the currency for supernatural people, you know, using the mark of the outsider or anything like that in there. So that was a little harder to puzzle out in the original version they put out. And also, and this was what we noticed in our games because we ran it from that version of it, is there is an alternate few pages that they put in there where you can answer some questions about your characters and make them a little bit more advanced. And we did, you know, that section was not in the original version. So your characters do not come out as competent by the base character creation rules as they do in Star Trek. And that really kind of threw my players because we went from, you know, what you're good at, you know, if you roll a 15 or lower, you know, you're probably going to, oh, my best score is an 11.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's another thing that I think Star Trek Adventures does really well is that, like, you should be playing hyper competent characters in Star Trek.
Yeah.
Right? Like a review I saw of the Decipher game, this is going back like 15, 18 years or whatever it is now, but the description they gave is that starting characters are like the McHale's Navy of Starfleet. You know, you can't do anything terribly well.
I mean, if you think about it, like, people joke about, say, Barclay, you know, looking at some of the people that maybe aren't the stars, but Barclay is still competent enough that he built like this relay that reached into the Delta Quadrant to communicate with Voyager.
Oh yeah, like the people who make up Starfleet crews are, you know, the most competent people available in the Federation, right? Like in theory, they're putting their best and brightest in, you know, onto those ships. Yeah. Well, so is your Star Trek game still going on, or is it?
Yeah, we probably have 1 or 2 sessions left. They had just liberated Beta Z. Our CO, he's been being pushed by the admiral that he knows to accept a promotion, and he just finally accepted his promotion. So I kind of want to figure out a good capstone for all of that, you know, to send off this campaign. I'm having a lot of fun with it, but I do kind of like, at this point, we started off playing in the Shackleton Expanse, which was the section that they kind of created for this game. But now that I know there's a Shackleton Expanse source book coming, I kind of don't want to set another game there until that source book comes out. I did have fun. I made up 2 brand new species that they ran into because, like, you can't explore an unknown section of space without coming up with some new species that nobody else has ever run into before.
Oh, for sure. And so I think you would run it again then?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely, because I'm already thinking of what I would do with a crew about the. I kind of want to set it after the Dominion War this time, probably around the time that the Lower Deck show is going on.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
You know, to where it's, you know, just past, you know, Riker is out there with his ship, and, you know, that sort of vibe to it.
Nice. I really, apart from my Star Trek that's when the Vanguard series would be set. I also really want to set something during the motion picture era, like around Wrath of Khan stuff, because there's, I've always been obsessed with, in Star Trek 4, when the whale probe goes past and there's that one ship, and we see that one captain talking about how we're trying to deploy a makeshift solar sail and we have high hopes for it. I'm like, this shit happens to every ship. Every ship in Starfleet deals with this bullshit, you know? And I love the idea that it's just like during that period, I mean, this is true, I guess, of the Next Generation era as well, too, but it feels like it's not quite the wagon trail to the stars that like the original series was, but it's more of a like I don't know, there's rougher edges.
I do feel like they played the Enterprise as the only thing in the whole Federation that can deal with this a lot more in the original series era than they did with like, yes, the Enterprise in the Next Generation era was involved in a lot of important things, but it wasn't the only starship that could respond all the time.
Yeah, although, I mean, that's definitely the case in DS9, too. They just give the justification of the location of it, and the like, they give better
justification. You next to the trouble.
Yeah, exactly. And you're going to be selected by the strange extra dimensional beings as their champions. So,
if I was doing an original series game, though, I would like to set it during the movie era, because part of what I have a hard time with is trying to work around, like, they don't know who Romulans are. You know, they don't know that Romulans are related to Vulcans until this episode, and they don't know, you know, at least by the movie era, they knew everything that wasn't brand new to the Next Generation. You know, it was a little easier line to draw there.
In your Star Trek games, did you have all people who were already Trek fans, or did you have a mix of Trek fans and people who were unfamiliar with the material?
I would say, out of 5 people, I would say 2 are dedicated of the players. I'm a Trek person, but of the players, 2 are probably big fans. 1 is a casual fan. The other 2 don't really care all that much. But they're both really good at picking up on tropes in a genre and playing to the tropes, and that was what was good.
Well, the game, I think, does a good job of helping you understand mechanically how to play your character. Like, even if you're unfamiliar, we had one player, Arlen, one of our regular players. He doesn't care or know anything about Star Trek. He's watched a grand total of, I think, 2 episodes at our suggestion. And I don't know if he watched the second one we suggested, actually. I don't know if he's seen Darmok yet. Because I think Darmok, it's a personal favorite, and I think that captures what Next Generation is about better than anything else. In the same way that in the Pale Moonlight captures what DS9 is about better than anything else. And it's one of my favorite episodes of TV ever. It's so good.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
DS9 is just good in general. But
oh yeah.
I don't want to get off on a
No.
I had just watched Far Beyond the Stars, and that episode is so great.
Yeah.
I that's one I'm not quite sure how I would run something like that.
Yeah.
But it was just such a great episode.
Well, that one is so personal to not only the characters, but more so to the actors as well, too. And like in that documentary about DS9, which I can't remember the name of right now, but
What You Leave Behind. It's the same. It's a variation on the name of the last episode.
Yeah. And it's, they talk about how like everyone had to give Avery Brooks some time, and because it was so emotional for him, and he was so invested in that.
Oh God, that one scene, he is so like he's putting everything into that scene. Yeah,
it's really great. But I think the selection of time period also plays to who you're going to be playing with as well, because like I've got one buddy who would not want to play. Like he was really against. He's a very anti-authoritarian character, so he's that player who always plays the rogue, who's a dick and causes problems and whatnot. And unless you've got like most Starfleet crews will not have room for that character. But in an era like Enterprise, that's definitely possible. Picard, if you're, because we got a Picard era sourcebook coming out. That's definitely much more plausible then. Wait, is it Picard book or coming out or Discovery book? I know Discovery's coming out. Do we have a Picard book?
They mentioned that they are doing source books based on both of those. I don't know if they're going to be strictly a Picard one or if it's just going to be this era one, but basically it was they had to clear that they had the rights to use that material.
Yeah, and like, how do you feel about those two series? I think the setting for both of those is rife with opportunity for great stories, and you can make it.
I think, especially if you're watching Discovery now, season 3 has been that would be a great era to play a Star Trek game.
I agree with the setting. I still haven't got past episode 1, and it's nothing to do with, I don't want to get into it, but oh man, season 2 felt like it got off of the, talk about a show centered around one character. And as when you get to a certain point in that first episode of season 3, it's just like, oh, come on.
I kind of felt that way too. Like I like Burnham.
Yep.
But it is very different to have a Star Trek show that, at least in the earlier seasons, was very much about a crew member, not the crew.
That's where season 2 felt a little more broad. But so as I said, I don't want to just bitch about this show. There's plenty of people online. The thing is, I totally agree with the setting, like, and the conceit of like the whatever it was, the warp instability or that's a great idea of like, cool, we're in the Dark Ages now. That's definitely, I think, would be rife, especially if you're more interested in a traditional kind of campaign. Like, you could see a Firefly-esque crew adventuring in that setting, right?
But I also like the feeling that the thing that still makes it feel like Star Trek is we have to rebuild what we had that was better. Not, well, this was bound to happen. It is kind of that feeling that, we can do better than this. We can move beyond this. And
I'm not far enough into the season to know what else kind of happens and what else is going on in the series. But like, you could have a really cool Canticle for Leibowitz kind of thing where there's what's his name? Ito, the guy who was the last Japanese soldier left on the island. I can't remember what his name is. I don't think it was Ito, but it's whatever the gentleman's name was. You could have that kind of thing of like the Star Trek outpost that's still, has that tech and whatever else, just not dilithium.
You should keep watching the rest of the season.
All right. I'll get past that first damn episode.
The first episode is weird because it isn't the same tone as the rest of the season.
Okay.
I was kind of wondering about it after that first episode too, but
I'll push through it then because I trust your sensibilities with it, and I'll go on. I did, like the first episode of season 2, I stumbled on as well too, and then I forced myself to go back just because what's his name, Anson, who's the actor who plays Pike?
Oh yeah, I can't remember his name now, but I really like him.
He's so good in that role.
I am really looking forward to Brave New Worlds.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, like everyone in that crew. Rebecca Romaine is amazing as number one. Like it just. Oh boy, I really enjoyed that a lot.
And I have to say, this is not a jab at the Kelvin era films, but I liked the redesign on the original outfits a lot better in this than in the movies.
Definitely,
because this felt like the original ones with a higher budget. They didn't feel like they were, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So one of the best explanations, it was Paul Levitz in one of the Legion of Superhero source books for that Mayfair put out. He had a little blurb at the time. Paul Levitz, it was cool because Paul Levitz was writing Legion of Superheroes and had been for years beforehand. So when he wrote those role-playing supplements, he was able to talk about authentically what's going on. And one of the things he said about, he's like, look, we are limited in our way of telling what the future is like by our own time period. So yeah, the older stories of the Legion had rocket belts and all this other shit, but that's only because we didn't have a way of describing the Legion flight ring. It's always been Legion flight rings. They've never seen an advancement. It's just and I kind of like that as the idea of not like revising what had happened. It's that we have a better, clearer picture of what that past was, what that past future is like now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. But anyway, we could wax poetic about Star Trek for a very long time.
I was just going to say, and speaking of, not to again go off the rails, but I still have my my Mayfair DC the Gazetteer for the whole world from that series, because that still explains stuff about the DC universe that doesn't get explained now.
Yeah,
like that's the first place they had the atlas showing where the cities are actually at.
Yeah. Oh, I've seen it referenced.
Like, Gotham City, New Jersey.
What's
That's
his name?
Interesting.
The Berlanti uses it as a reference for the CW shows, which is super fucking cool.
Yeah, and apparently a lot of that stuff that's in that Mayfair guide is stuff that the editorial knew, but they didn't just want to come out and say, like, Metropolis is in Delaware. But, you know, they had an idea of where it was at so that they knew, which is, of course, why I go, wait, how is Metropolis across the bay from Gotham City? Never mind.
So, we've looked behind that. That's awesome. It sounds like you've had a really, really great time with both.
Oh yeah,
both those two things. Let's talk about games that we're excited about. And I'd like you to go first because I'm gonna restrict myself to a short, punchy. This is why I'm excited about this thing with mine.
That's what makes things trickier. The first thing I was gonna say is I had Ironsworn on my list, but I have now played 2 solo sessions of Ironsworn, so I don't necessarily have that on my list anymore. I mean, I'm enjoying it a whole lot, but it's almost not fair to mention it here. But since it was on the list when we first started talking about doing this episode, I'm going to mention it anyway.
Okay. Why is that exciting?
What Ironsworn is really interesting because it is set up. You can run it like a traditional fantasy game. You can run it where there's no GM, or you can run it solo. And part of why you can do all of these things is because there are charts in there called oracles that are meant to prompt you in a certain direction. Your character, you are playing an Ironsworn, and basically what this is kind of like it's sort of like a Conan-esque, Hyborian Age type setting where civilization is kind of further between, and the Ironsworn go around this setting and they swear to do things for other people. That is their calling is that you go around and you commit your word to someone's goal and you complete it. And that's what you do. Mm-hmm. So you have a very strong idea of how you're playing your character. Your job is to go from place to place, asking people, do you need something done, and doing it for them. Mm-hmm. And everything is based on progress tracks, and the progress tracks are always 10 boxes long, but how much of the box you fill in will vary depending on how difficult a task is. So, like, easier tasks, you might fill in 3 boxes when you're successful. But, like, if it's an epic quest, you make 1 mark in the box. You don't even fill in the whole box. So, and that's how you track progress on things. And if you ever fill in boxes, you can attempt to do something early, but your boxes are going to be your score. Like, normally how you resolve what you're doing is you roll a d6, you add your ability score, and you roll 2d10. And if your die roll and result is higher than one of the 2d10, it is a weak hit. If it's bigger than both the d10s, it is a strong hit. And if it's not bigger than either of the d10, then it's a miss. A lot of this is kind of based on Powered by the Apocalypse, but it's also kind of taking it in a different direction. But it's really interesting. I really enjoy how that works. So I'm going to leave it. Okay, I found a technicality. The reason I'm leaving this on my list is because I have not run it for other people yet. I've only used it solo.
And it sounds like you had fun with it solo?
Oh yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Like, I will say I've been recording them because I feel like if I was just like in my head going, oh, this is what I'll do now, it wouldn't be the same. Like if I'm recording it, it happened. Like I can't backtrack. I said it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. I understand that.
Actually, but yeah, I would kind of like to see it in a group. And yeah, you don't have classes, but you pick 3 different assets, and assets can be something like an animal companion or a talent that you have or a piece of equipment, and you spend your XP to advance those assets.
Okay, and do you gain XP only from completing tasks and things like that, or
yes, you have.
Okay.
The only way you get XP is when you fulfill a vow.
Cool. So there's the inbuilt reason to go out and do shit that's dangerous and whatever. That's cool.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
So yeah, I really like that.
I am going to alternate between 2 old and 2 new for mine, because I decided I mean, the amount of it's been now become a running joke of how many out of print games I run regularly on the channel. So I'm going to try and branch out and talk about some new, some old. Well, the first new one is Free League's Alien, and this is very popular. This has made a lot of people's lists in the last little while. To be honest, though, the game that I'm more excited and plan to bring to the table is Vaesen, because just Vaesen, I adore everything about that game. The reason, not only because, I mean, it's one thing that's very cool about this, I like the changes they made, like Modifius. They make changes to the core mechanic of the Mutant Zero system to make it fit for each thing. I like that there's 2 different modes to play in this, where there's a cinematic mode and there's a more, what do you call it? A cinematic mode and a more like gritty kind of mode. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah, it's the campaign, like if you're going to play multiple sessions.
It's basically, so the cinematic is you're fucked, but here's some extra stuff for you. Campaign is like, well, you're fucked, but in the long term, not the short term.
Yeah.
But it's I really did enjoy character creation and how it incentivized play at the table with how you get XP in Vaesen when I ran it. And I like that some of the supplemental material they're putting out expands on the setting in a way to make it a credible, like, so you'll understand where it's happening. The one thing that I never really get a sense of, apart from there being monolithic mega corporations at play that are shitty, I never really get a sense of what's going on. I know there's colonial marines. I don't really know what they do, know? So it's cool that this gives you a setting to actually have this take place in. And I like that there's a Colonial Marines book coming out, which will hopefully flesh more of that setting out. And what I'd be interested in, what I think is so cool about that is Heroes survival horror is cool. Survival horror where you're being fucked over by some other party is even better. Right? Like it's and that's what I think that you could do with this, instead of just having a, and I mean, not to downplay, that could be a lot of fun too, but for an ongoing game, the way that like rival nations or mega corporations or colonists versus mega corporations may be at odds with your characters or the campaign or what's going on. The idea of the betrayer in one of the adventures was also really interesting. So yes, I mean, that's it. I mean, this is my probably most popular one that has been offered, but I think it's definitely been well received for a reason. I would not have thought that you would be able to get a good playable campaign based game out of that franchise, and boy, am I glad to be wrong about that.
And that would have been on my list too, so thank you for freeing up one of my slots.
Honestly, of all the ones that was with my new selections, that was one of the ones I'm like, I'm pretty sure this would be on Jared's list as well. What's your next game?
Wow, let's think. What would be my next one? I think you know what? I'm gonna do the Kevin thing here. This is definitely on my list here.
Ooh,
the Sentinel Comics role playing game.
Mm-hmm.
I love the card game. If you've ever played Sentinels of the Multiverse, it is a collaborative card game where you're playing your deck as a superhero, and you and all of your friends play a team of superheroes, and there's a deck that represents the villain, and there's a deck that represents the environment, and that's how that card game plays. This game, the Sentinel Comics role-playing game, is in the same setting, and what it does is it kind of mashes up Marvel Heroic, Fate, and the mechanics from the card game into an RPG system. And it's really interesting. One of the things that I really like about it is there is a scene tracker. So and this is something I think is missing sometimes in a lot of superhero games. There's a scene tracker, so the scene only lasts a certain amount of time. And there is a green, yellow, and red zone. So in the green zone, you just get introduced to the situation. There might be a villain and there might be a train going off the tracks or whatever. In the yellow zone, things escalate a little bit. In the red zone, things escalate some more. And if you don't finish whatever you want to get done in that scene by the end of the scene tracker, it doesn't get done. So if you have to save a bunch of people, then the villain gets away at the end of that scene tracker. And I like that because there's a lot of things in a lot of different role-playing games where it's like you want your villain to get away, and that's what would happen in the fiction, but the players are not going to play along with that. And this is a thing saying, no, that's the end of the scene.
Yeah.
You're not getting anything else done here.
One of the interesting things about this, like the whole superhero role-playing genre or RPG genre in the last little bit, is the shift away from simulationist power fantasy combat, which is like, don't get me wrong, I fucking love that stuff in Marvel, superheroes, in DC heroes, in Champions, and towards more of a superhero story simulation thing. Like Masks does that. I haven't played Sentinel or purchased it, so I don't. But it sounds like that's very similar to that.
And
definitely. There's a Powered by the Apocalypse inspired one too that I can't remember the name of, but it's similar.
Masks is the teenage.
This is an Altered Worlds or something like that, or other.
Worlds in Peril is
Worlds in Peril. Which is hilarious because it has my friendly local gaming store in the background. Like a fight takes place in front of the Sentry Box in Calgary.
But that one had really nice illustrations in it too. That and Masks both have really nice illustrations, which is good for the genre that it's about.
Masks,
and also so does the Sentinel comics book.
I've run Masks for my son actually, and he really, really, really enjoyed it and really got a sense of what it is. And the accessories you can get for that are also quite cool because you can just put down and be like,
great.
Yeah, this is what you're facing, Yeah, Masks is a really solid game. It like a lot of those Powered by the Apocalypse games, it does require people to be wanting to engage with the story in that specific type of way, which is just not for everyone, right?
Right. And you are very much in Masks. You are very much playing teenagers who happen to be superheroes. You're not playing superheroes that happen to be teenagers.
And I think
that's kind of the way the mechanics work.
It's interesting that a lot of those games, and it sounds like Sentinel does this as well, where the violence is a byproduct of the story. It is not an end of itself. Where a lot of the simulationist stuff is, getting that haymaker off in Champions is a fucking badass thing to do. It isn't in a larger structure. You can say that, there's also the ongoing story where we're trying to track down Dr. Destroyer or whatever. But really, what the rules are telling you that it's about, and what the interesting mechanical decisions you make are about those kind of things.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is when you have the story emulation permeate everything in the rules, it's a lot easier to get a table to buy in. Because when I was running my DC Adventures game, I love that. It's based on Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition. I really do like that system, but I had a part in there. And this is actually something it tells you can do with hero points, where it's like, give everybody a hero point and just say something happens in the scene. But everything else in that game is so centered around being more simulationist that as soon as I said, well, Mirror Master shows up and he's going to help Captain Cold get out, I had a player say, I'm not accepting the hero point. I was like, well, what do you mean? I'm not accepting it. I'm not letting him escape. And that turned into, okay, at the table, am I going to tell him, no, these are the rules, I'm going to force this thing to happen this way? Or am I just going to say, well, I guess you captured these guys, even though that wasn't how this was supposed to go,
Hold on. Our rules is written. Our hero points, can you refuse them like that?
No, you can't. But it was me deciding at the table, not wanting to...
No, and absolutely. Well, and that's but it's good to point out that that's a problem. Like the IT folks call it problem between keyboard and chair. It's not a problem with the rules. It's not a problem with their own. It's that, and I mean that's there are games like the Cypher system that allow you to do that, where you can refuse.
And you can in Fate too. If somebody tries to compel an outcome.
And see, for me, it's so herky jerky that I feel like I for myself, I feel like that it interrupts the flow of the game. Like, I'd rather respond to whatever is happening than be like, no. That's not, this shitty thing ain't going to happen. So, I don't know. I mean, like, yeah, but the one interesting thing with DC Heroes, the Mayfair version, is that they have that, and I never used this back in the day when I was a kid, but they have a whole subplot system that has mechanical benefits for like introducing problems and things like that. So it's an interesting way for them, and they get XP for when that stuff, or whatever the equivalent, hero points or whatever, when they engage with that stuff or they bring it up in play. So it's cool that the players get to be have a bit of shared authorship over that, and there's an incentive for them to play up those problems of the trouble at Wayne Tower, or the Vicky Vale showing up unannounced when you've got to go out and fight the Joker or whatever. So it's yeah, and I mean, just for clarity too, for everyone listening at home, I mean, folks who are regular to the channel know my feelings on champions quite well, and those things. It's like anything else; it's making sure you have the right tool for the job you want to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So
yeah, and I've heard people. I believe this was some of the discussion around Marvel superheroes or Marvel heroic when it came out is. Like Mutants and Masterminds is modeling a world where superheroes exist, and Marvel Heroic is modeling the pacing of a comic book story.
Exactly,
and those are different things.
Yeah, and like if you try to do one with the other, you're going to have suboptimal results because the games, especially for a highly tuned game like Marvel Heroic, it's not designed to do that. It's designed to do something different, right? So. Yeah. All right. So my next thing, I'm going old school again here. My old, and I mean, relatively, I didn't, now in retrospect, I should have grabbed the older versions of the books. But the next one is Rolemaster. So Rolemaster is on the list because it's a game we played quite a bit when we were kids. Those who aren't familiar with Rolemaster was kind of a gradual response to some of the problems that some people had with old school D&D, like AD&D. The lack of a nuanced or detailed character generation system, a more expansive spell point-based magic system, and critical tables for different weapons you were using. The 3 books that make up Rolemaster were Character Law, it was Character and Campaign Law at the time I was playing it, Arms Law, and Spell Law, and originally they were modular, and you could use them, mix and match them with your AD&D, but then they also sort of worked all together to have their own game. The reason I'm excited about this is I think the same reason that people really like Pathfinder 1, in that everybody becomes a passive participant to the story being told by the system. Because Pathfinder 1, there's a rule for everything, and you can find that stuff in there. And I only recently sort of clued in that part of the appeal of that is it's interesting to see what happens sometimes. Like in a recent session, we saw how fucking deadly orcs were in it, because they're just, for low-level characters, like, they won't go down. They're terrible. And that's just some of the things that are kind of, I get why that's interesting, because in the same way that the emergent play that I enjoy from AD&D Second with like random encounters and, overland travel and shit like that, that ends up with this fun world that we're all discovering and that is unanticipated, but has clear sort of character goals driving it through that stuff. Pathfinder is the same way, and I think this is the same way too, where like the critical hits and the critical fumbles that happen in combat would make for really interesting. It'd be interesting to see how that feels at the table, because I've never really done that. When I ran it as a kid, I ran it and we sort of house ruled a bunch of stuff, and we never ran moving maneuvers or things like that in the way it's supposed to be run. So it would be interesting to I'm interested in seeing how that would play and how the players would play their characters. The complexity of it at the time was a real turn off for me as well too, because like how much of your percentage of your total action is used by certain things and whatever. But honestly, like having run a lot of modern games now, and it's not a deal breaker for me. And I think that it would be interesting to see. And it's also, it's one of those games where I've mentioned on the podcast and I mentioned on the channel a few times, and I've had like long emails from people explaining like, this is why it's great, and here's some resources you can use to make it easier to get to the table. And at the time of recording, Against the Dark Master, which is more based on MERP, a streamlined version of Rolemaster is coming out soon, and in 2021 we're supposed to be getting the new version of Rolemaster, but I'm not really interested in either of those. I want to play old school Rolemaster, see what it's like at the table, and see what happens with the story as we go through it.
What's funny, again, with the kind of dovetailing things, I have Against the Dark Master, and I am interested to dig into it because I played MERP in high school, but the GM was our least experienced GM of any of our players, and that is not a good combination with MERP.
For those who may not be familiar, too, MERP is a acronym for Middle Earth Role Playing. It was the licensed Tolkien RPG before Peter Jackson's film started coming out. But, it was a painful session, but I wanted to see what they did with reverse engineering a different but similar setting into it, and seeing what those rules look like now and how much they actually modernize them. So I'll be looking at that at some point in time. I've only skimmed it so far. So what's your next game then?
Okay, so my next game, I think I'll have to go with I'm gonna throw Rebel Crown in there. Just because Rebel Crown is it's like Blades in the Dark and Scum and Villainy and Band of Blades, where it's based on the Forged in the Dark system. But instead of some of those, what you're doing is you are the heir to a throne, and you have been ousted from your country. And the progress of the game is you winning back different provinces and reclaiming your throne.
That's very cool.
Yeah, what I really like about that is it's not quite as grim as Band of Blades or Blades in the Dark. Yeah. I mean, it could be, but it's not quite that oppressively dark. It is, and you can retake provinces, without battle as well. Like there's, different ways to resolve things. You can convince two people to go to war with each other too, because it's kind of an open-ended thing. But one of the things that I like about it too, that I've found is kind of interesting in role-playing games now, is there is an end game to this thing. There's an end of the campaign. Either you die and don't get your kingdom back, or you get your kingdom back. And that is something like Scum and Villainy and Band of Blades both have that built into them too, where there is an end game to the overall campaign. And I like that, but I was kind of interested in how that works with this, because each province you take back gives you different benefits, and it looks really interesting, and it's kind of examining that idea of higher level D&D play from way back in the day, where you have domains and just saying, no, this game is all about that.
Yeah.
This is all about collecting territory and saying that you're the Duke of whatever, and what you can do with that.
So, for those not familiar, the three games that Jared mentioned, Blades in the Dark is by John Harper. It's a game where you're playing a crew of criminals, and there's an interesting. I mean, it's inspired by the Powered by the Apocalypse games, but it doesn't have like play sheet, or no, it does. It does have those things.
Yeah, it has playbooks.
Yeah, it's got playbooks, but the moves, they don't have moves. There's a different way of mechanics being played out. It feels honestly a little closer to traditional stuff than what it uses. This really clever mechanic of clocks, which is honestly, I mean, it's a riff on successes versus failures from skill challenges.
It's different. It's progress tracks.
Yeah, and. Then that game inspired a bunch of games that use that sort of the same core concept of having 2-level play of your characters and your and a larger shared resource, be it the gang or the group or whatever. Scum and Villainy is a Star Wars riff on it. Band of Blades is a Black Company riff on it, where you're playing a mercenary company that's got to march from the battlefield where they suffered their greatest defeat in history and make it to the safety of this fortress, and then that's the game. Is when you get to the fortress, you're done. The thing, Band of Blades, actually, I tried getting to the table once, and it wasn't hugely successful, but partly because I don't think I prepped the players well enough for it. But also if you think that Pathfinder fans are vocal when you don't get rules right, fucking Power by the Apocalypse fans, man. Oh my goodness. If you don't run things specifically the way they have it in their head, not necessarily how they run it at the table, how they have it in their head, holy shit will they tell you about it.
And what's really funny is I've listened to the actual creators of Band and Blades and Scum and Villainy do actual plays, and they're a lot looser with their rules than people that read their books.
Well, if you want to learn those games, like Straws Adamczyk, I think, is that the name of the guy who he was co-creator?
Yes.
Yeah, and then but Straws was a player in John Rogers' game, his Band of Blades, his Blades in the Dark game. It does a terrific job of showcasing how that game can be super cool at the table, and it has less of the I want to say finicky bits, but that's actually something that's a positive. A lot like Cult Divinity Lost, Mask, City Mists, Mask. I love those games a lot, and but it doesn't have a lot of those tags and stuff that you see in those games. It's got a different framework for it, but that's cool. I actually did not know about that game, and I need to check that out now. Rebel Crown, it's called.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm gonna check it out after the stream.
And I also, if you want to see a really good playthrough of Band of Blades with Strauss running it, if you go to Sean Nittner's actual play channel, and he has that in podcast form too, so you can look it up on YouTube or in podcast form. And then you actually get to hear Strauss doing it. And there are several places where they're like, well, the rules usually do it this way, but in this particular circumstance, let's try this way. Yeah. And, I appreciate that because it also shows like, oh, you're not going to break the game if you do this. It's just this is what you normally do.
It's crazy. I mean, I've never in a little amount of Power by the Apocalypse games that I've run on the channel too. I've had more shitty comments from people who are so precious about the rules from those games than any other game, which is bonkers. I run a lot of PF2. You think that, and I don't run the, I screw up the rules on that. I screw up the rules on Starfinder. Those aren't the ones who are like, well, really, you should be this way because it's designed to, and like.
If you want to see the long knives coming out, look at any of the comments when Critical Role ran Monster Hearts 2.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Holy shit.
And it wasn't from the people that watch them play D&D. It's from people that play more, Powered by the Apocalypse games, watching them and saying, he's doing all of this wrong.
Oh, I know. And like, I remember his responses to it too. And I'm like, I recognize that feeling because it just, boy, oh boy, no one's told me I'm a shitty DM like what Powered by the Apocalypse players. That said, but Band of Blades, the thing that was like the game itself, the reason I got it to the table is the fascinating 2-level play that you have in that where you're sometimes focusing the attention on the soldiers in the field doing missions against this incredibly powerful undead army with all these super evocative villains and shit like that. And then you're also playing the higher level strategic level play of the leaders of the mercenary army, and that you get to shift back and forth between the two. That is so cool.
What was really neat to me is when I read through it, I wasn't thinking of it this way, but listening to that playthrough on Sean Nittner's channel, the people playing the officers, their officer roles, they added so much personality to those characters.
Yeah.
Like, I'm thinking that was almost like, when I first read it, it was almost like a meta thing. Like, oh, you're making these decisions because you're this person, but you're really playing the soldier in the mission. It's like, no, they were playing those officers. There were personality traits to Sean Nittner when he was playing the what do you call it? The provision person.
Oh, the quartermaster.
Yes. Yeah. He was, the way he played that quartermaster, it was like, no, I am not letting you use anything extra unless you can justify it. And he made them jump through hoops to do that. And it was great.
That's all. That's exactly how I'd want to play it. It's like the mechanic for bonds in Delta Green. It's sort of, it's not written to be like to have transitional scenes or whatnot. If you're not familiar with it, it's a way of like recovering. Delta Green is basically a riff on Call of Cthulhu, and you recover sanity or stability, I think it's called in that game, by spending time with your bonds, who are like family or clergy or teammates or things like that. And it just that to me is like, because there's also it's like Call of Cthulhu, where there's a gradual degeneration, and you can have it affect your bonds. Instead of taking stability loss, you just take a hit on your bonds. So it's the breakdown of your marriage. It's the the loss of your.
I just have no one that I can talk to anymore.
And I just like, that is rife for role playing. Like, I would totally want that to occupy as much time at the table as what the actual adventures were, because that's part of it's a cool arc. And for both those games, it sounds like for Rebel Crown as well, it's the reward of seeing the game in motion, right? Those games are designed to have interesting things happen as you're going along and playing as a walking wounded kind of group or character or whatnot. I love that stuff.
Oh yeah, and that was the other thing. Like, every time they had it said that they lost troops, and Strauss would make them like, you have to name this person and tell me about them. like I want to know who this person was that just died in this mission. They're not a throwaway person. Like, you know everyone that was left in this mercenary company. Who was this?
I think it is in the pilot for Community, where like, you want to, we're humans, we want to form bonds with things. That's why I can tell you that this pencil's name is Kevin, and when I do this, a little bit of you dies inside. Look. Perfect.
Oh goodness. Also, I did want to throw one disclaimer out there. The Monster Hearts 2 is a fine game. I have run Monster Hearts 2 and I've played it. Kevin Lovecraft, if anyone is familiar with him from online circles, he ran this absolutely amazing game of it, where we were all at a summer camp in the late 70s at Gamehole Con, and it was just a brilliant, absolute awesome game. All I am saying is that there are a lot of people online that are very specific about how they think games should be played, and it's usually people that I don't see playing as often.
yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I should say as well, we have had a couple of very, very lovely comments from people who, more so from games like City of Mist and Cult. Because after Bandit Blades, after it didn't go as well as I was hoping, and also because of some of the really noxious feedback I got on, I was like, you know what, I got other games I can run. So yeah, but I mean, there is a really great community, and the creators are very, very active online and seem like very approachable and very cool people.
I have just to show this off. This is my case of Powered by the Apocalypse games with playbooks and everything printed out. Like, I would carry this to conventions for pickup games because I love Powered by the Apocalypse games. That's not the problem. So I just wanted to reiterate.
Absolutely. And the thing I would say about the Powered by the Apocalypse games too is that the playbooks do such a good job of getting you into the game very, very quickly.
Oh yeah,
definitely. Of like, this is the cool stuff your character, and to get you excited about your characters as well. Like, it's I love the Masks playbooks. They're so good, and yes, that's this character. Okay, so my next one is going to be a new game as well, relatively new, and that is RuneQuest Glorantha. Now, technically, I did get RuneQuest Glorantha to the table twice now, to create characters, once online, once not online. The complexity of the setting scares the bejesus out of me, and that is the biggest impediment for me running the game. For those who aren't familiar, RuneQuest Glorantha is it's a game that the core mechanic is based on the basic role-playing system, so it's very much like the Call of Cthulhu or Stormbringer, or what other ones use that? I guess the Elric game used it, Hawkmoon, Chivalry and Sorcery. Anyway, so there's quite a few games that use it. It's a D percentile Call of Cthulhu, I guess, unless I've mentioned that twice now. The thing is it also has a bunch of, there's a lot of magic. It is set in a Bronze Age fantastic setting. Myth and gods play a very, very big role in it. And it is very, very detailed. So the rules are, you're tracking where, you have armor and where you don't have armor. Hit location is a big thing. There's a lot of back and forth of like attack parry stuff with it. And then there's also, there's a lot of moving parts where, like, you have a relationship with your cult, so your character is very much grounded in the universe. When you make your character, you also create the history of their family and figure out how you get to that point to start the character, which is incredible. And it has one of the most beautiful bestiaries of anything, any RPG. They did this brilliant thing where they got one. There's one artist who was interior Corey Trago Erdner, who's also really active on Twitter as well, and shares a ton of the art from his home campaign. The art in here is just, it makes me want to explore this world with players so freaking badly. Not only because of how great the art is in it, but also because it has a bison riding tribe in it. And my home province, the bison is the sign. It's our like provincial animal, so I wanted to run. And there's some great supplements for it too, like collections of short run adventures as well. So there's lots of accessible ways to get into it. I just in particular, because we stream all of our games too, I would be cognizant of there would be things I'd get wrong about it, and I and it's not that I'm super concerned about necessarily for the players at the table. If people are wanting to watch a RuneQuest Glorantha stream and the person's getting a bunch of shit wrong from it, that takes away from your enjoyment, and I feel that's different than just people being shitty about the rules. Right?
Yeah.
It's like if I put zombies in a Star Wars game, people would be like, come on, man. So that's it.
Unless you specifically called out what is the two novels that they actually did that were Star Wars zombies.
There's an episode of Clone Wars where they had
the brainworms
thing too. So, but that said, it's a really, really interesting game, and I love, in the same way that it would be like a lot of those other games would be interesting to see in motion, the way you advance your character is by doing stuff with your skills, right? That's a core part of the basic role-playing thing, is that if you want to be better at weapons or you want to be better at talking to people, do it. And that gives you your little ticks on your character sheet, and you can advance that shit during the downtime, like Pendragon, like Ars Magica, like some D&D stuff is trying to do now. Downtime is very much a part of the game when you are in the off-season, and you can like pray at your god's shrine and get some stuff back. And that's, so it's a game that it scares the bejesus out of me more so than what a lot of other games do, that I would do an adequate job of running it. But it's so cool.
I was just going to say, one of the things, I have not looked at that game, but I did review the 13th Age Glorantha supplement.
Yep.
And one of the things they did a really good job of in that was narrowing it down to saying everything we're presenting here is going to assume this time period and this valley. So that you can expand what you know about these things, but we're just defining this right now because there is so much you could do. We don't want to overwhelm you. So it's, and it was very clear about what it was, what it was engaging with there. And I like that.
And that's something they do. I mean, the recommendations for how to approach it are in the book there. It's great stuff. But even like trying to pick where you want your thing to start is it's like mind-boggling. It's it's honestly, it's like I'm not sure if you're familiar with Degenesis as well, but the Six More Vodka game, the post-apocalyptic one, it's one of my absolute favorites I've run over the last couple of years. But the setting itself is so detailed and so bonkers. But they also have a great PDF that says, like, look, here's how you approach running this giant. My dad has a saying, how do you eat a whale? Bite at a time.
I love the thing that I loved in that 13th Age Glorantha, which is setting stuff, not just the how to implement it for 13th Age, was the whole entering the myths to play them out. And how literally, people will reenact these myths at certain times, and they go into this other plane to reenact the myth. And if you screw something up, it can have repercussions in the real world. Like, that myth is not as strong, and what that myth meant to the world starts to erode if you don't perform it properly. And that was really such a neat concept, because in a way, what it's saying, and this kind of plays into that whole like worrying about whether you're doing it right. In a way, what they're sort of saying is everything is the way it is because everyone agrees that that's the way it is. But
yeah.
that's not necessarily, and I kind of like that on a philosophical level too, where it's like,
it's Mage the Ascension, right?
This could change over time,
Yeah, that's the core setup for Mage the Ascension.
Mm-hmm.
Consensual reality, right? So yeah, but that's cool. That's actually an interesting idea. I have Glorantha 13th Age, so I should take a look at the. I haven't read the rules stuff for that because if I'm going to run it, I'd sooner use RuneQuest than I would the other because it gives them more grounded. One of my players gives me shit for constantly running grounded campaigns and not like let me play a fucking demigod. But I want to run I something more grounded with it, so I'd use that system. But if there's good advice for wrapping your head around the world, I'll take a look at that over the break then because.
Yeah, I think it'd be worth it to see how they narrow it down, just so, maybe that way you don't feel as much like I could set this anywhere, because if you're using that as a guideline, it's like, this is where I will set it,
Okay.
And you can still touch on big, weird shit by having them go on those, mythic quests too, even if you start off in one particular area, because you're reenacting these much bigger myths and things like that. So.
It's cool that it works that way too, because like the setting in RuneQuest Glorantha, they've just concluded a massive war with the Empire of the Moon or whatever the hell it's called, and part of that is because of these like mythic successes of like pushing back their magic or their belief or whatever. So that's cool to know that that's sort of the overarching structure for the conflict. What is your final game?
Oh goodness. I had a whole gigantic list, but I'm trying to keep things to a little bit newer things.
What about the one that? No, fuck it. I mean, in this house, you are free to talk about whatever games you want.
I totally understand. You know what? I'm gonna answer this just because, even though I think this was last year, but years don't mean anything anymore.
Seriously.
I am going to throw out Tachyon Squadron for it's a setting for Fate, and I'm gonna say that because for some reason these last couple of weeks I have just had this hankering for Starship combat, and I don't know why. And not like I love my Star Trek game, but that's different because that's like capital ship mass, tactical thing. I mean, like space dogfighting bullshit that would never actually happen, but still looks cool.
Yep.
So I started rewatching Battlestar Galactica, and so that also fed into this too. But so this is Tachyon Squadron. Like I said, it's a Fate game. But what happens a lot with games that are Fate based is there will be some aspect of Fate that they tweak to work for that particular genre that it's emulating. So one of the neat things that they do in here is when you have certain types of equipment that is good at doing a certain thing, it locks a die. So in other words, if you have like advanced missiles installed on your ship, you take one of the die that you're rolling, and you always roll 4 dice in Fate, and they have a plus, a minus, or a blank. Well, what happens if you have that advanced missile system installed is you set aside a plus.
That's
so that alters the probability of that missile system hitting.
That's like the one roll engine, right? With the one that powers Godlike and Wild Talons, where it's fucking around with the dice pools, and you can set them in a certain amount or what. That's pretty cool.
And what's interesting about that is Fate usually does not do that. It's usually, honestly, Fate is less based on the die rolls and more on how willing you are to spend Fate points to invoke different aspects. And I like that because it is kind of intentionally pacing the story, because you have to think, like, do I want to accept, getting my ass kicked in this part of the game and keep keep generating some more Fate points? The trickiest thing about Fate is to have a GM that understands the flow of Fate points and realizes if players aren't getting them themselves, you have to do some things like invoking some of their aspects just to make sure that people have those Fate points so they can make that decision.
Yep.
Because if you never do that, then you spend the Fate points you had at the beginning, and then everything just kind of peters out because it is not as dynamic without the Fate points. But I really like in Tachyon Squadron because of that's one way it plays with it because of the equipment. But the other thing that's interesting is I'm trying to find a good picture of it. there is a ladder system for dogfights.
Hmm.
And basically you roll to see where you're at in this lineup, and you can only attack people that are below you in the lineup. But you can spend actions to move yourself up. So in other words, you would sacrifice, dodging in order to get yourself in a better position. So you might get shot up, but then you get above the person and you can, then you're able to attack them again.
Do you think that would be like, is it loose enough structure that it could be adapted for something like Star Wars Saga?
I actually have a friend that was working on doing that because I like this a lot better than the range bands for, even in the Fantasy Flight for Starship combat.
Yeah.
Like, I think range bands work fine on the personal scale, but they get a little fuzzy for, Starship combat.
Yeah.
And I really like, because having that ladder of where you're at really does make it feel like you're jockeying for position and dodging around each other. And basically what it is you're in that ladder, you take one round of actions and then you take another round of actions and then everybody shifts down one.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can do something like where you say, I'm not doing anything, I'm holding position, so you don't expose yourself to fire. But as everybody shifts down one, now all of a sudden, you're even with somebody again. So then, you're on even footing with them. And it really, it's a very interesting way to portray dogfighting that doesn't require a representational map, but it is a symbolic map that still seems to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, anything that focuses everybody's attention at the table at the same time is, in my mind, always a win. Whether it's a shared resource, I get the point of the stage initiatives and things like that, but one of the best things I find with our AD&D second games is one person rolls initiative for the party. Mm-hmm. So everyone is paying attention at that point. Everyone has the shared feeling of success or failure when they're like, oh, fuck, why'd you roll a 10? And then we also, we make a big deal of, you keep rolling initiative until you lose initiative, then it goes to the next person. And when I played in person I do this with Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea too, and I have a physical dice, a big oversized D6 that gets, pass that thing away in shame, man. And the Star Trek, what do you call it? The Star Trek Decipher system, I think it does this with Star Trek Adventures as well, but having the shared resource of the ship during Starship combat. And to be honest, the Starfinder combat system is a Starship combat system, super crunchy. As far as things, it is definitely not abstracted, but it does do a really cool job of having everybody paying attention and working on what they're going to do collaboratively, on that scene. It's expanded even more in the Starship Operations Manual, but I mean, it plays like BattleTech, and I love BattleTech, so it doesn't. But it would be cool to actually, in Starfinder, that would be an interesting thing to do there, because in the core rulebook of Starfinder, they've got two different ways of modeling chases. One of them is an actual detailed, you're moving miniatures and shit like that. The other one is an abstracted version too. So I don't see why you couldn't do something like that with starships as well too in it. Less so with whole hordes of ships out, because there are neat rules for squadrons and dogfights in Starship Operations. But yeah, that sounds cool. Well, that sounds excellent. I mean, that's from what's the publisher?
That's actually an Evil Hat game that came out as a supplement for Fate.
So this is a national thing here, but Evil Hat, man, fucking ship to Canada. Come on.
I understand. I know they made a decision about that because it was kind of like they were getting hammered for their prices for shipping to Canada.
Yeah. Which is what we're getting anyway. When I order shit in from that shipment from Noble Knight, I got dinged for royalties on top, or duties from it coming in. But that's the cost. Also, it costs about double from UPS to ship from UPS to Canada than it does comparable, which is bonkers. But and the thing is, that's the cost of stuff though. It sucks and whatnot. But to not be able to get some of those games, or to have to go through hoops to try and track them down. What a colossal pain in the ass. Because for every I imagine there's going to be a vocal, because it's the internet, so there's going to be a vocal component that will bitch about the cost of things, but like it's not Evil Hat's fault that that's what things cost. Like,
and I think a lot of that came from several Kickstarters where people were like, "How dare you charge me this much for shipping when I already paid you this for the book?" And it was like, we can't help it. That's,
no, like, are you not like you understand? You occupy a world where geopolitical events happen, right? So, like, you know, Brexit and recent events in the States have just made shipping from the States crazy. But you know, that's the cost, you know, and leave it to the consumer to decide whether they're going to pay that cost or not. But whatever,
I understand.
They still make terrific games. I track them down another way, but it is a real pisser that I can't just get them from them. Yeah. You know.
I definitely get it. One of the things, not to tie this all the way back to the beginning, but when you started mentioning Starship combat, and I mentioned Starship combat because I started talking about dogfighting, one of the things that got me in Star Trek Adventures the first time I read through it was I thought, wow, Starship combat is so much more detailed than like interpersonal combat or any other part of these rules. And it felt wrong to me until I played through them, and it feels like a Star Trek fight.
Yeah.
Because Star Trek fights are not, you know, boom, boom, something blows up. It is very much, we're positioning, you know, we have to reinforce the shields here. We're going to try and take out specifically their engines.
Look, it's a combination of Horatio Hornblower combat and submarine combat because of Nicholas Meyer.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, Nicholas Meyer is the one who directed Star Trek Wrath of Khan and Star Trek 6. In Star Trek 2, he intentionally tried to model it after that. He wanted the uniforms to look more like actual, you know, Navy uniforms, and he wanted the feel of Starship combat, which is where we see the most elaborate Starship, you know, combat to date. And I agree. I mean, like, it should feel like that. There's an exchange and whatnot. It's a whole ordeal. If it's the whole game, then that's a problem. But for the times when it will come up, that is how it should be. It should have that level of detail. I agree. And
I like the fact that you can target, like, I just want to take their engines out. I don't want to blow them up. I just want to take their engines out.
Well, and then we can leave. The handouts that come with the DM screen or the board cube, having like your operations, here's everything you can do and all the rules you need. Man, it was not this year, but last year's gaming marathon. It was gonna be Star Trek Adventures because I want to use those handouts so badly. Oh man! So my last game, I'll be very quick with this because I've monopolized a huge amount of your time here. My last one is another old one calling back, and that is MechWarrior 3rd Edition. For those who aren't familiar, and with the clans and Lost Tech and the setting for it. Solaris 7, the mech gladiators gambling / gladiatorial combat paradise. MechWarrior 3 is the 3rd edition of the role-playing game that was published, or a role-playing game that was published to go along with the BattleTech universe, the universe of, basically it was like medieval combat or a medieval setting, but with giant robots instead of knights and whatnot. And then they evolved the storyline across the years of publication, and it is I think the first gaming setting that I like head over heels in love with. It is, the way I've described it to friends has been like it's Game of Thrones but in space with giant robots, and that's very much like the Succession Wars era time, and then going forward, my time period is like Third Succession War and a little further forward, like 3025. 3050, I like the clan invasion and stuff like that, and then things get a little bonkers. But campaign set post-clan war on Solaris 7, the reason MechWarrior 3, it has a staggeringly complex rules or set of rules for doing damage in combat, and they abstract. It's not like subtractive, like it's not like damage reduction with armor. Armor does this really interesting thing where it stages back. Like you'll roll your damage and you'll stage up to a certain level of success, but then your armor will subtract back from that. So it was abandoned between the time. There is a more current role-playing game for it called Time of War, but they abandoned that stuff in favor of just like effectively like a hit point system. And I like this weird amalgam so much more than it because it has a very weird effect at the table. There's a life path system that is astonishingly punishing. So like every character you generate from, if you think that character is from Traveler, end up poorly. Like MechWarrior 3 says, "Hold my beer," because it's crazy. But the the setting, because so much of their fake future is based on strong cultural associations of our present, that it's easy to figure out what different things are. Like House Kurita is, samurai in space. House Davian is kind of like a noble, a house of, it's basically the British, royalty in space. I love that every one of the different factions has good and bad to it as well too. Every one of them does awful, shitty things. Every one of them does noble things. There are heroes that can come from any one of them. And I'll note that I didn't hold up BattleTech because I want to run a BattleTech game that involves no mech combat. It's all abstracted and whatnot, because as much as I do enjoy BattleTech, all the attempts that they've made to try and capture the role-playing element of how BattleTech combat was described in the novels. BattleTech is one of the few game things I like. I don't read gaming novels just because I don't really like them all that much. But it's one of the few things where I've actually read and gone back and reread stuff set in the universe because I liked it. They're not great novels, but they have engaging characters, great settings, and and Game of Thrones is a great frame of reference of the kind of like struggles and all levels of society, and also having a major exterior threat that you could have in that game, and have interesting stories set in a bunch of different places in it without having to make the whole story about one group. And the very much in like the characters in this are very grounded, but as much as I joke that you get, life is rough for all of your PCs. I love that. Like, I love the idea that you've been, your life's been shit for all these different things. You got kicked out of this thing, you lost a hand, and now you got a myomer, prosthetic limb. You're suffering from PTSD or whatever, but then our story starts. That to me feels like great hard sci-fi, where it's fixed, the cool stuff that happens, notwithstanding the proto-molecule, but like or spoilers, I guess, but the stuff that happens in The Expanse. If you're 4 seasons behind in The Expanse, you ain't going to watch it now anyway, so I'm not telling any more about that, but that kind of story that happened in The Expanse, notwithstanding that sort of, stuff, it all could happen in BattleTech as well, because it's hard sci-fi, Jesus, our main ship was blown up, and what are we going to do now? Kind of stuff. All that I think would make for a really, really fun story. And because the rules you've got are there's an edge mechanic, which I don't think was in previous mechanics. So you got a narrative metacurrency to affect dice rolls and stuff, which interestingly, your starting edge is based on, you can spend your edge during character creation to miss some more stuff. So there's an incentive to live with the shittier stuff that happens.
I burned my luck earlier in my life.
Exactly. Like, I avoided a bunch of other stuff, but, so I just think it would be like the character creation, life path character creation is always a lot of fun to do, especially in a group. So it's fun to meet all those characters. And I think that the setting of Solaris 7, if you think of like a more hyper-violent version of, gangster era Vegas mixed with some elements of like the film Gladiator, so much fun. It would be such a fun game to run. I have yet to have any players tell me they'd be interested in playing that, but I think it would be really, really cool.
What's funny is MechWarrior was probably one of the first, maybe like the third game that I ever played RPG, or not MechWarrior. MechWarrior. Yes. Because we got so into BattleTech for a while. And that was like one of the most affordable war games at the time, because they had the little cardboard standees that you could use for mechs. You didn't have to buy all of the miniatures in order to field an army of things.
No.
But I still remember in first edition, when we were rolling for our mercenary company, we got like a fucking locust working for House Leo. So, and for anyone that doesn't know, House Leo pays mercenaries the worst of any of the houses.
And a locust is a, what is it, 20 ton?
Yeah, it's like one of the smallest mechs there is. It's a scout mech. It's not.
Yep, and it's really fast, but you have to use optional rules to really make it more difficult for them to fight. And it's only armed with a short-range weapon. So if you stay at range and move quickly, you might not get hit by anything more powerful than you. But if you get up close, you know, you
How
are
kind of missions are we supposed to go on with this thing?
That is so good. Oh my goodness. Well, that's great. Yeah, it's you know, the old Crescent Hawk's Revenge video game too. My buddy had that for his computer, and we used to play that together. And it also just great memories of that kind of struggle of building up. Like you could definitely play, and I think most people probably did play mercenary companies playing ongoing campaigns and whatnot. And with the I don't know about the most recent one because they just reorganized all the books again. But the Catalyst, when they did that version of when A Time of War first came out, and they had the 5 core rule books with the like matching spines that would make up a thing. Those rules are phenomenal for being able to dial up and dial down the level of complexity that you want to have with BattleTech. So that's my final. Boy, am I excited about this game, which only came out 25 years ago.
Speaking of getting terrible comments on something, I reviewed MechWarrior. I didn't review it. I previewed MechWarrior Destiny, which is the more narrative version. It's kind of like Shadowrun Anarchy, where it's way not as complicated as the core RPG rules.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that they are looking into doing that, where it's like, let's do a light system and a crunchy system. So if people really like the setting, but they don't like the style of rules, they have an option.
Yep.
And I kind of like that mindset. It's very interesting because they even have mech rules in that MechWarrior Destiny. But the reason I didn't do it as a full review is there's a substantial portion of the book that is about converting things from either standard MechWarrior to this system or from current BattleTech into this system.
Yep.
And I didn't feel like I could really talk to either one of those things without being more conversant with the current versions of them. So I did it more as a preview than I did as a review. But speaking of the shitty comments online, I happened to make a comment about how, at least when I first started playing, that House Kurita had some oversimplified Japanese tropes in it, and how this does a better job of presenting those things. But, you know, it was something for people to be aware of. You cannot believe how many negative comments I got about how dare you mildly say that maybe this oversimplified the Japanese culture.
Well, yeah. Are you saying that you didn't read every single, like the supplement that I use as the example to sort of solidify in people's mindset just how important the fiction and the history of the fiction was? There's a supplement called that came out for BattleTech in the 90s called Objective Raids, where all it is it tells you what manufacturers are on these fictitious planets. That's the whole thing. There's no mechanics. There's no whatever else. It's just like you find this here and you find this here. And I mean, FASA at the time, FASA did one of the things that was so engaging about all of their games was the in-fiction writing. You know, like that you were relying on in-fiction resources to figure out what the story was and what had happened. You know, you did excerpts from journals or news feeds or like technical, you know, magazine specs or things like that. And it really sucked you into the world and made it feel very credible. To the point, I like the old school setting. I like the like 3025, and I like the clan era as well too. But one of my favorite role playing supplements ever was Operation Klondike, which came out under Catalyst's watch, and it chronicles the exodus of Kerensky from after the what do you call it? The fall of the Star League and before the Succession War first kicked off. And it has a super Battlestar Galactica vibe to it of like desperation and whatnot. And it's all told in fiction from stuff. So, man, oh man, one of the most engaging reads. I would love to run a campaign that's set around that time and like from the Aramis coup to the Exodus and then to the arrival on the Pentagon worlds. But I would never do that campaign justice.
See, I'm going to draw more hate from anybody BattleTech hardcore that sees this game. I cannot remember what was the mercenary company where the Black Widow was the head of it.
Wolf's Dragoons.
Yes. I read through. Speaking of how in depth some of these things were, there was a Wolf's Dragoon source book. And yes, it had a handful of mechs that they had customized, but so much of that was just missions that they had run. And it was like the history of the mercenary company from its inception to like where it was at currently in the campaign. And I remember reading through that, and the way this ended up is they had been a long-term contractor to House Kurita. And at the end, they got screwed over by Kurita, and they left the service of House Kurita because they got screwed over during this one battle. And I remember after reading that thinking, Kurita sucks. Because it was so, and I know it was told from their point of view. And like you said, like almost every house in BattleTech has done something shitty to people at some point in time, because it is basically like a Game of Thrones type situation. But I just remember reading it from that mercenary company's point of view. It's like, they gave you all these years of service and you did this to them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Kurita was a terrific foil for, those who are playing House. I played House Kurita. I fucking love House Kurita. Like the types of mechs, the ones that overheated all the time, the dragon, and they introduced a campaign. Oh, I think someone might be at my door again. Give me 1 second here. Sorry, I have like 3 packages that are supposed to show up today, and all I need to sign for. So clearly, smart time to schedule a stream. Sorry, Jared, and for those listening at home.
But I was just going to point out, I loved my Warhammer when I was playing in BattleTech. That was my favorite mech to use. So that also made it much rougher to get a Locust in MechWarrior.
Yeah. There was one of the supplemental ones that came out, introduced some of the early prototypes that were used by the different factions, like early versions of mechs that would come out later. And one was a gladiator, and it's a medium mech that had jump jets and a PPC on it, and it became my absolute favorite mech when, like, 3 games in a row, I'd fuck around against a bigger mech and then tag him in the head with the. It's also a cool look, like the design is very cool. But anyway, so
for anyone that's interested, I did want to throw this out here too. The MechWarrior Destiny does have a separate section that covers the clan wars separately. So if you like the clan wars, it's in there. If you don't like the clan wars, it's in a separate section.
Nice. Awesome. So that brings us to the end of. We've already been chatting for almost 2.5 hours. So let's bring this to a close. So first off, clearly the thing we need to draw from this is that we need to make sure that not as much time passes, because otherwise all we want to do is talk and talk.
Yeah,
talk.
Exactly.
So thank you. And I'll say a huge Jared, thanks so much for taking the time to, for suggesting this, and also for taking the time to join me behind the screen. Once again, let's just at the closing to remind everyone, I have the links in the video, but where can people find more of your awesome talk, in particular these great reviews you keep talking about?
All right, so you can go to whatdoiknowjr.com, and that is my personal blog spot. You can go to gnomestew.com, where not only will you get my awesome reviews, but you will also get reviews done by a few other gnomes, as well as some really great, awesome GMing advice articles, and even some player advice articles. And also, if you want to hear or if you want to see the videos of some of my actual plays, you can go to just type in Jared Rascher at YouTube, and you'll find me. And finally, I've been converting a lot of the things that I've been doing lately for actual play into podcast form. So if you go to anchor.fm/whatdoiknowjr, you can find all the podcasts that I've been putting up of my actual plays.
Awesome. And those are 5th edition, right? Or the 5th edition and your Star Trek Adventures?
Actually, it is 5th edition. It is a Streets of Avalon campaign, which is 5th edition. There is my Eberron game, which I'm using the quest rules for, where everyone is playing someone that works for a newspaper. Nice. So that was actually a really interesting, different paradigm for an adventuring group. And then I also have my solo Ironsworn games that I've been recording and putting on there.
Awesome. So if you want to find some more actual play podcasts, particularly we have a lot of folks who've been asking for podcast formats as opposed to the YouTube format. There you go. Mm-hmm. Lots of great stuff. And I can speak from experience that Jared runs a hell of a game too. So lots of great stuff to be found there. I'll end by saying, so for those listening at home, thank you so much for joining us for this seat behind the screen. We are currently one day off from New Year's Eve. So if you are listening to this live or contemporaneous, we hope that you have a wonderful New Year's Eve and a great start to 2021. As is always the case, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns regarding what we talked about, any of the games, please don't hesitate to leave a comment in the comment section below. What I'm going to do as well, too, I'll save some people some comments, but I'm going to try and add links to the publishers for every one of the games we talked about as well, so that you're not going to be asking for where to find those things and make it easy for you to go. I'll point out, like, none of us have... someone asked a little while ago about affiliate links. So we don't have sponsors on the channel or anything like that. We have Beetle and Grimm has very generously donated some stuff for us to auction off, but I also happen to buy all their stuff as well. So it doesn't, any of the games we've got, there's no affiliate stuff or anything like that. These are games that we enjoy and we love and are excited to play. So, it's not a financial vested interest in any of this stuff either. If you can also find me on Twitter at Dungeon Musings, and you can find me by email. My email address is dungeonmusings@gmail.com, and you can find in the link or in the description of this video, you can find a link to the Dungeon Musings Discord server, where we have tons of great people who are active talking about a bunch of great stuff. We've got channels dedicated to every campaign we run the channel. We've got channels dedicated to finding a group. We've got channels dedicated to setting up virtual tabletops or streaming. We also have a channel that tries to keep up to date for opportunities to play in conventions as well too, especially now that we're all having conventions remotely, and a bunch of other great conversation, great people, great conversation, and you are more than welcome to join us over on there. Last thing I will say is, once again, a huge thank you to Jared for joining us today. It's been great catching up. I definitely, we need to get another date for a follow-up. Because there's so many things we didn't talk about yet either. We didn't even talk about the art of game mastering at all. No.
And if by some weird, odd chance you're watching this because of me and you haven't seen Kevin before, which would be extremely weird to me, but if for some reason that's the case, especially on his podcast, there are some brilliant insights into the ongoing thought process of planning a campaign and what makes a game exciting to people, and he is just great to listen to for that and extremely engaging. So if you haven't listened to his podcast, you should.
Thanks, Jared. That's very nice of you to say. So with that, I'll say, for those listening at home, if you are joining us during the current crisis, we do hope that this finds you healthy, safe, and weathering the current crisis as well as can be expected. We hope that we gave you a couple of hours to turn your mind off of the troubles of our world and think about some of the wild and crazy games that we are going to struggle to get to the table. And until we see you again, thanks for watching.